Hello and welcome to Wonder, brought to you by Geo Co. I'm Holly Cooke, as always, joined by my colleague Dr. Anthony Reid, and we've had an unbelievable couple of sessions, Anthony, with polar geoscientists, Antarctic explorers, and I think that we're in a bit of just like an Antarctic friends, but let's calm it down. I would actually like to recap some of these with you.
Yes.
What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Oh, well, I was just so impressed on so many levels with Jackie and Kate. You know, they are true explorers. I think one of the things that really blew me away is, you know, often you think about the Antarctic exploration, that there was a heyday of exploration, you know, maybe back in the time of Mawson and Edmondson and Scott and all those, you know, and others, many others.
Yeah.
And, you know, you think, oh, well, people who are going down there these days, they're not really explorers. They're just going on a holiday. But it's not the case, is it?
You're right. Like even I think like the top floor of the SA Museum is dedicated to all these like Antarctic explorers. And it's sort of like an age bygone. But we actually sat and chatted with people for like the most ambitious deep field Antarctic expeditions over the 2024 summer.
Yes. Yeah. Really deep field. I think you can't underestimate just how challenging that environment is, like how close you are away from really being in trouble out there. I mean, you guess, you know, in a sense, all field work has its dangers, and everybody who does field work and lab work, any type of work in construction, whatever, you're always trying to minimize the danger you're in. But, you know, when you go out into those extreme environments, you really, you know, you are putting yourself at risk. And so I just thought the thing that was one of the most fascinating things in a way was the idea that there were little ropes, that there was string between their tent. She called them a bliz guide or a bliz rope or something.
Bliz something. Point being, you needed assurance that you could find the next 10 or get to the next 10 in a blizzard, because the case is that you wander off 10 meters in the wrong direction. That's enough. That's enough to do you in. That's
total whiteout.
It's actually probably the most high stakes like bushwee you could do is 10 meters from the tent. It's scary. That stuck with me, Anthony, was I know there's an element of danger in all kinds of field work.
Sure.
This was next level. It was next level, that's for sure.
Yeah, they really are working hard out there. But as for their actual science, what were some of the key things that you sort of thought were so interesting? You know, that they're both doing really, the whole program is incredible. But is there any kind of highlights that you sort of took away from it?
Totally. I think so on two levels. One was how diverse the studies were. So you had people like Kate who were really interested in looking at the ice, and like Captain Obvious, Antarctica's ice. But then Jackie took us through, the ice is fascinating. But it's a continent, and it's a rocky continent, and it has a rocky continental history. And actually the best stuff is underneath the ice. And so I think even just like I didn't quite appreciate that they had, 27 scientists. Some were looking at the moss, the lakes, the birds, the ice, the rocks under the ice. I just think that was wicked.
Yeah, an integrated science program. It's almost the dream scientific journey, really.
Yeah, and they're all stamping each other's visas like, it's just the best. I was really taken by, and like, bear with me as I fumble through, to our listeners, even me and Anthony still fumble through understanding the science of our guests.
Of course.
What I was fascinated by is Jackie's comment that the Denman Glacier was in its spot as a function of the tectonics of the area. Like, it's not just, whoopsies, now there's a glacier here. Like, it's actually the reason that this sort of continental ice sheet, actually it's a glacier, sorry. The reason this glacier is here is maybe because there's faults going on in the area, or like there's geology underneath which impacts where the glacier is.
Absolutely.
I love thinking about that.
I think that, don't you keep going?
Well, just it rings a bell with something you were talking about in Central Australia. But I've kind of forgotten. Tell me how the hell you think about that.
Oh, the Central Australia example. Yeah. So I was thinking about that after talking with Jackie, and she sort of described that the glacier kind of is channeled in some way. Like you said, there's geology underneath it. It's not like you just have a 5 kilometer thick sort of packet of ice that just sits on like a amorphous, just sort of bulging kind of continent sitting there. No, the
Yeah,
continent,
yeah.
it's just amazing when she described it, how the
Topography,
continent
yeah.
itself has topography. There are huge mountains underneath the ice. There are great big valleys underneath the ice. There would be lakes, there would be huge plains. There would be, all kinds of topographic features. There would be little plateaus. There were all kinds of stuff under there. And I guess the example from Central Australia is we were walking up a river valley, and the river valley becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. In fact, we climbed then up to the top because there was a bit of a ledge up there. And I remember looking down at the exact spot where the water tumbled off that little ledge and down into the next part of the river. And there was a clear as day, a little fault zone. So you could actually see a fracture in the rock there between the sandstones that were making up that little cliff section there. And it's like that fault was the reason that the river had traced its way back up there. That fault was guiding the location of that little bit of erosion that was forming that river valley. And so I imagine that Jackie's interest in that area in the Denman Glacier is that you have huge continental scale faults which are happening. And she did talk about uplift zones and downthrown zones and things like that, and sedimentary basins. So I imagine that there's that really big scale architecture of the continent underneath the glacier, which helps channel that flow of ice out from this huge ice sheet. It's incredible stuff, isn't it? It's just incredible.
You said that so much more elegantly than me. I'm so glad I threw that to you.
What?
No, but you're so right. The we call ourselves the Wonder Podcast. The wonder of 4 kilometers underneath 4 kilometers of ice, there being something akin to a landscape, except it's choked by this blanket of ice. It's just so cool.
Now, the thing that I found interesting, Holly, was that there was an interaction between that underlying rock and the ice itself. And Jackie mentioned how there were little kind of melt zones or like rivers underneath the ice as well. I mean, have you seen that in any kind of glacial landscapes that you've been to? Where you see that, you see the glacier and you see kind of a river or like a water shooting out the bottom of it in some way?
Oh my god, I actually have. Sorry, I was thinking of the Athabasca Glacier in and around sort of Jasper in Canada in the Rockies, and oh my goodness, there was at the tongue of the glacier, like the glacial tongue, it literally looks like a tongue as it's coming out the valley. There was water, so I think that's probably
it's exactly it. The same sort of thing.
What I remember most about the Athabasca Glacier was it existed in this sort of moraine moonscape. And when geologists talk about moraines, we're talking about basically as a glacier moves, think of it like a bulldozer and like basically bulldozes the landscape in front of it and it collects up all of this miscellaneous rocky stuff. And then when the glacier retreats, it leaves behind essentially like hills or sort of a fortress of rocky stuff that it had previously bulldozed. And it's a very, very strange landscape out there.
Yeah, the rocks are all tumbled around everywhere, totally jagged, all kinds of orientations. It's a really, I've seen that sort of thing in Tibet as well. They're really quite incredible.
Oh, cool. And I reckon that reminds me of something else Jackie said about they could sort of tell, they could recreate the history of they could proxy the history of where the Denman Glacier was at certain periods in time based on the kinds of rocks it was eroding, based on the kinds of geology it was eroding. So I think I called it cookie crumbs in the podcast, but it's essentially like depending on where that sort of glacier's sitting, it'll be chewing at different rocks, and it's
amazing. And the detective work, the geological detective work that they're doing there, by looking at the rock, so the glacier is sort of carving its way down through that valley, like you said, and chewing up all this rock, and it spits it out at the end when the glacier carves off the continent. And all that rock will just fall down to the ocean. And so the idea of drilling down into that sediment that sits at the front of the glacier there is just incredible, because then you can reconstruct through time. Well, at this period of time, we can see rock type A, and we know that rock type A is actually located 150, 200 kilometers inland. And so at that time, rock type A must have been being scraped off by, or part of rock type A, by that glacial movement. It's fascinating to see that connection. I think one of the other things,
It's literally like sorry, this is a dumb joke. I shouldn't have interrupted you, but it's literally like Cluedo. It's like it was the Denman Glacier at this spot with the
with the candlestick.
Detective work. Yeah, it's detective work. You're right. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh no. I was just going to then kind of link it back to Kate's work, and Kate's being the incredible geophysicist, so she's looking at it from a kind of a totally different perspective, whereas the geologist is focused on the rocks and the physical minerals and materials themselves, their chemistry, their age, their shape, their color, all that type of thing. The geophysicist is really looking at it from its physical properties. So how, in this case, Kate's geophysics is related to how conductive the rock is. Now, the idea that rocks are conductive, it just blows my mind completely, because the poles and wires that traverse or transport electricity around the place and through which we're communicating, okay, that's conductive, right? But a rock?
Oh, it's disconductive.
I know. And yet they are. Obviously, it's very, very small amounts of current. You're not going to get an electric shock by putting your hand on most rocks, I'd imagine. And so these incredibly sensitive equipment that geophysicists like Kate use, it's very impressive stuff. How did you think, though, that they look through an entire kilometers worth of ice? I mean, how does that work?
Well, I hope that's a rhetorical question. Yeah, the point of seeing the invisible, which is the subsurface, it's literally magic. It's literally magic, and the way that I try and sort of think about it in my little failing first year physics brain is that, yes, electric shocks on the rock, but certain minerals have a certain capacity to conduct electricity. Well, no, pick me up if I totally screw this up, but they have a certain capacity to conduct electricity. And so as you sort of look through the earth, that conductivity will change, and that should give you a map of the kinds of materials. And of course, in real life, it's much more complicated than that. But I was fascinated to try and understand, how do you then connect that to like mineralogy, to like the compositions, to the chemistry of the earth. And as far as I can tell, Kate actually does a really good job at that side of it too.
Oh, definitely. Oh, Kate is really a pioneer and is at the forefront of connecting geophysics to geology, and that's why I've been very, very keen for her to come and talk to us, but also professionally to work with her as much as and learn from her as much as I can. But yeah, the idea that, like you say, different minerals that have different capacity to conduct electricity, or at least a current, is really astonishing. And the fact that they can see so deep is the thing that is amazing to me as well. Different frequencies of that electric current, or that current which is flowing through the earth, if it has a very long frequency or long a very long wavelength, then you're able to see very, very deep into the earth. And it's just this ability to measure long wavelength kind of changes in electrical current, or short wavelength if you're looking at shallower material as well, is what enables them to see deeper into the earth and through a kilometer's worth of ice. I mean, mind you, it's a little bit like the way it's a little bit like a CT scan or an MRI or an ultrasound or something like that you use in medical imaging. All the geophysical methods are a little bit similar, but I'd love to explore that a bit further down the track and try and get some more geophysics sort of people explain to us, how do you do this magic?
It's unreal. And Kate, if you think that was your last rodeo on Wonder, you're wrong. I can't remember, Anthony, if we spoke about this, but something that intrigued me about Kate's work too, maybe we didn't touch on this in the episode, the fact that ice sheets are heavy, like the Denman Glacier is heavy. And so there's a thought where it's pushing down on the earth and it's actually exerting a force downwards, but as it begins to shed some of its weight because it's melting, and as it actually accelerates and it's melting and it becomes lighter and not give or take a couple decimal points, right? We can tell how much lighter it's becoming. Does the earth push back up and compensate as it like pops back up into as that as that Denman Glacier is shedding its weight, does the Earth go, oh, thank God, and it like can breathe again and it comes back up? I don't think we touched on it, but could you?
We didn't, but it's a thing. It is a thing. Yeah, that'll happen, and that's what's happened in the Northern Hemisphere in the last sort of 10,000 years or 20,000 years since, the end of the last kind of major ice age that we call ice age. There were huge glacial systems across huge swathes of northern Europe and northern North America and so on. Even in Tasmania and places here and New Zealand, anywhere there were big mountains and so on, there were big glacial systems. And you're right, they actually are heavy. They depress the earth, and you get rid of them, and they'll pop up. So there are actually a whole there's a whole sort of science around how do you measure that rate of uplift related to changes in the ice volume and ice thickness. It's amazing stuff. But to think of the earth as being dynamic, as being able to be pushed down by weight, and be able to flex up when you remove weight, I think it just adds a whole level of kind of nuance to the dynamism of the planet as well. It actually bends and moves in response to climate changes as well. It's incredible stuff.
You're absolutely right. The fact that the Earth bends in response to what we think of as like, our atmosphere is like invisible gases. Like it's
no, water will do it. Water does a hell of a lot in the Earth's kind of processes.
Understatement of the year. Water's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to reflect. I did a lot of reflection after Kate's final comment, and it took me off guard. I don't know about you, but it took me off guard in a very positive way, which was, oh God, it was honest. It was to say, the research is really important and it's fascinating, but at the end of the day, we know that there's ice loss in Antarctica because of a warming atmosphere. We actually get that. And how many decimal points do we need in order to really act on that? And I thought that was a stark acknowledgement from a scientist.
It was, yeah. Something we need to reflect on. Yeah, it's a very serious situation that we're in, and the people like that are telling us. People who are actively researching this are telling us that the glaciers are melting, and you can see it, and you can see it in Antarctica. And the challenge is how well we act on these things. I think on the positive side, taking it right back to when Jackie started describing Antarctica in the first place as a zone of research, as a zone of international collaboration and cooperation, and I guess
and peace,
and peace. That's right. So that's the answer for us in some way, for international cooperation and collaboration and working towards a common goal. And I guess Antarctica kind of holds up an example of how good it can be.
I like that. A place for peace. And well, I guess until you and I are bringing back 1,000 kilos of rocks from Antarctica for a Geo Co special, we'll have to live vicariously through such amazing researchers like Jackie Halpin and Kate Selway.
Fantastic. Thanks, Holly. Great to chat.
Thank you. Until next time, Anthony.
See you soon.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to these last few episodes. We do actually have an Instagram. We're at the Geo Co. So do check us out over there. Thank you for joining us.